معاناة سجن واضطهاد وحرمان من العمل السياسي والحزبي، ولكن المعارضة باقية والعزيمة صلبة من داخل قيادة المعارضة الماليزية. معكم زينب الصفار، تابعونا. هو أنور إبراهيم واحد من أبرز القادة السياسيين في ماليزيا خصوصاً وآسيا عموماً. هو اليوم زعيم المعارضة الماليزية وقائد حزب عدالة الشعب. أما بالأمس فقد كان الشخص الثاني بعد رئيس الوزراء السابق محاضر محمد والخلف المتوقع له، لكنه خاض داحس والغبراء معه وعزل من منصبه وحوكم وانتقل إلى صفوف المعارضة عام 98، وبعدها أدين بالسجن 10 سنوات بتهمة اللواط، لكن تم الإفراج عنه عام 2004 إثر نقض الحكم بعدما أمضى 6 أعوام في السجن. وبرغم قضاء أنور محكوميته خروجه من السجن عام 2004 لم تتوقف طموحاته السياسية. عام 2008 فازت المعارضة بقيادة إبراهيم بأكثر من ثلث المقاعد في الانتخابات العامة، ما شكل سابقة بالنسبة لائتلاف الجبهة الوطنية الحاكم منذ استقلال ماليزيا عام 57، لكنه في العام نفسه اتهم مجددا بممارسة اللواط من قبل مساعد سابق له، وتواصلت المحاكمة طوال عامين إلى أن حكم القاضي ببراءته في هذه القضية. إبراهيم وصف المحاكمة بالمؤامرة، مضيفاً أنها ذات دوافع سياسية وأنها مؤامرة دبرها فاسدون، كما وجه اتهاما لرئيس الوزراء الماليزي نجيب عبد الرزاق وزوجته روسما بأنهما ضالعان في المؤامرة لكونهما بحسب قوله قابلا مساعده السابق محمد سيف البخاري أزلان قبل توجيه التهمة. ووصفت محاكمة أنور إبراهيم بأنها تمثل أكبر تحد سياسي لرئيس الوزراء الماليزي نجيب عبد الرزاق، الذي يحاول إعادة بناء الائتلاف الذي يحكم ماليزيا منذ أكثر من نصف قرن، بعدما مني بخسارة قاسية في انتخابات عام 2008. كما ويرى عدد من المحللين السياسيين أن المحاكمة الأخيرة هدفها صرف الإنظار عن الأزمة الطائفية في البلاد وكذلك الضعف في الاقتصاد الماليزي. وهكذا أسدلت الستارة على واحدة من أكثر القضايا التي أثارت جدلا واسعا في واحدة من أكبر الدول الإسلامية في جنوب شرق آسيا. والآن قبيل الانتخابات المتوقع أن يدعو إليها رئيس الوزراء عبد الرزاق خلال الأشهر المقبلة، ماذا يخبرنا أنور إبراهيم عن مشواره السياسي والتحديات التي لم تسلم حتى عائلته منها، وعن مقاربته للصحوات العربية والقضية الفلسطينية وأجندته السياسية؟ Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, head of the PKR party and Malaysian opposition leader, welcome to Al-Mayadeen and welcome to this special interview from the inside. My first question to you, sir, is why do you insist on the political work? And we all know that there has been lots of schemes to draw you away from the political life and the political arena. What does it really mean to you?
You have to believe there's a conviction for freedom, for justice. And Malaysia is a great country, enormous potential, and I think we offer a reform, Islah agenda, and that keeps me going.
Now, you've been attacked a lot by some of the people that you were part of their, to a certain extent, entourage, you were close to them, one of whom is the former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, and you were attacked, and you were apprehended, and you were jailed, and you suffered a lot. Why do you think certain people, or whom you consider your enemies, to be that cruel with you? Is it because of your stances concerning reform and anti-corruption, or perhaps you stepped on someone's toes?
Well, you come in, even when I joined government under Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, that was under a reform agenda. Judicial independence, a free media, basic rights of our people, gender equality and justice, and giving meaning and opportunity for the Muslims, you know, to live as good practicing Muslims. And of course I was very strong against corruption, cronyism and abuse of power. But this is seen, of course, to be a challenge to the status quo, because people like Mahathir, although he did some good programs and I supported, I was part of the team, but then the children are billionaires, and they thought that by this reform will therefore eat into that or affect their monopoly of not only power but also wealth and the economy and business.
But why this harsh way of attacking you and throwing you into jail? And then also in jail you were tortured to a certain extent,
Yes,
like
yes.
a person like Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, he was tortured this way in jail, and also you were followed by those sex scandals, so to say. Why?
Well, I did not anticipate.
Is it just, sorry, excuse me here to interrupt that, is it because of the reform? Is the reform only bound to Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, and that it would stop if we throw this person in jail?
Yeah, I mean, precisely, Zainab, that is the problem with most dictators, authoritarian leaders. You are familiar with the region in
Sure.
the Middle East.
We have a lot in the Middle East.
And there's a problem. They think by attacking one leader, you will then stop the movement. They've been proven wrong, you see. You ask me, I did not anticipate that. Well, I would know, I would expect them to sack me, but not to beat me up to near death, not to imprison me for 6 years, solitary confinement, and not to continue to demonize me every day. Today, I'm an extremist, Muslim extremist, I'm pro-Ikhwan, the next day I am CIA, the next day I am pro-Israel, the next day I am a sodomite. So you know, they are lost for strategy. Everything will be thrown at you.
And they
why?
were also attacking members of your family.
Yes, my wife and my children.
Yes, we will come to detail on these various venues in your life, but you were also jailed from the beginning of your life as a young person, perhaps in 1974.
Yes.
But you were calling for a noble cause. Can you tell us something about that,
Well, in
please?
1974, I supported the demand of our poor farmers, mainly Malay Muslims at that time in the rural areas, which completely neglected and marginalized. We achieved independence, but the poor has been completely marginalized. The few leaders enriched themselves. So I then just had a small demonstration in Kuala Lumpur and supported them. And for that, I was detained under the Internal Security Act, which is a political detainee, for 2 years without trial.
So you started your career in politics as a political prisoner without trial since 1974, and you were jailed on different occasions. What has this left in you?
Well, you mature in the process, of course, but you always have this tawakkal ala Allah. I mean, there is a trial, that you have a conviction in life, and you know there's ethics in governance. You know that there is tribulations that you have to accept. But one thing I learned, which is makes me feel more humble, is that you value حرية, freedom. You value justice, عدل, more than ever.
You value honor too.
Yeah,
Right.
and dignity, yes,
Sure,
honor, muru'ah,
sure.
right? And this is more than what you generally felt before you were in prison. Because in prison, you understand, you see people, how they've been
And
treated.
it's not any regular imprisonment, it's solitary confinement.
Yes,
So this adds to the suffering of the person.
yes.
Yes. Now, allow me here to move to something very important, which is the status of Arabs in Malaysia. Now, Malaysia, we all know that they made certain privileges for the Arabs which they could not have elsewhere, even in Arab countries. Now, if the opposition wins, what is the track of the Arab-Malaysian relations?
You are talking about
how are you going to approach the issue
of the local Malay Muslims?
Yes,
Yeah,
the workers here and the Arabs, I mean, also.
Or from
the Middle East.
You know, we have a somewhat more open policy. Of course, we do protect the Malay Muslim majority, but we move on in terms of adjusting the policy so that it's not seen to be discriminatory, one. Number two, a policy that supports the local Malay Muslims should not be seen or an excuse or pretext to enrich the leaders and their cronies. You use, yes, we will protect the Malays. But whom do we protect? Which Malays? My children. That must be corrected. But in terms of our relations with the Middle East, you know, Muslim countries or even non-Muslims, I think this is very important in terms of religion, in terms of culture, in terms of education.
And certain rights perhaps inside the country.
Well, rights, because I think for citizens, for non-citizens, of course, as in any other country, but generally we take a more open view. We welcome a lot of friends, be it from the neighborhood or even from the Middle East, the Arabs.
Now, you were interested in initiating a kind of talk between Islam and the West. Now, after 9/11, Islam became the sole enemy of the West. And with the rise of Islamophobia, do you think that this is able to materialize, this dialogue or this talk between Islam and the West?
Well, Zainab, it has to be done.
It has to be done,
yes,
but
you also understand, you know, I was teaching Georgetown for some years,
sure,
that the Islamophobia, the anti-Islamic elements, the extreme prejudice against Islam is quite pronounced or predominant, particularly in certain quarters. Now, do we then surrender to the whims and fancies of these extremists or the ignorant, actually? Hardly any understanding, because to them, Islam is equivalent to Al-Qaeda or Islam is equivalent to Taliban, period. You see? And we have to battle face on with them, because if we don't, they will allow the minority extremists to actually influence.
And this is what happened with the movie about the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Many movies, literature, statements, even you remember the Pope when he came initially with such,
yes,
blanket, generalized statements. But this we have to combat. I therefore support and initiate the Muslim-Christian understanding, Islam and the West dialogue, and for that matter here, Islam and Confucianism or Hinduism, because this sort of understanding would probably help ease some of these prejudices.
Right. In your congratulatory speech for President-elect Obama, you advised him to engage more with Iran and not to follow the steps of his predecessor, George W. Bush, in the way he supported certain dictators and dictatorships in the Middle East. How can you explain this?
You see, it is important for the United States not to take a blinkered view of the world. I mean, they may choose to disagree with Iran, but they must engage with Iran. If you talk about nuclear capability, then the general Muslim world will say, why not Iran and yes to Israel? Why yes to India and no to Pakistan? You know, so these issues can be only resolved through reasoned dialogue.
But do you think the Iranians are willing to talk to the Americans?
I'm not suggesting it is easy too. I mean, I have my views on some of the democratic transition and policies in Iran. But then why do you take a combative anti-Iranian view? And not only that, a very prejudiced view. My statement on Obama is that there's generally feeling that he is better than Mitt Romney, all right?
Right.
But then...
Better in what? You know,
well,
sir?
Better in terms of the rhetoric, sometimes you look at the Cairo speech, but not in action.
But not in the foreign policy.
Not in action, not in the foreign policy, not in his response to the outright murder of women and children and killings in Gaza. I mean, this is totally unacceptable. You know, people see. What I'm saying is, compared to Mitt Romney, who declare war immediately, so you have lesser of the two evils in a way.
What about the track of George W. Bush? How do you criticize it concerning its approach to the dictators that used to reign the Middle East?
Well, this is what I term as politics of ambivalence. On one hand, you talk about democracy and freedom. Then you work with the Mubaraks and the Ben Alis and the Gaddafis, less so Gaddafi maybe, but and therefore there's a vast contradiction. You sometimes is perceived to be condoning the excesses. I mean, this is continuing, mind you. I mean, my position as the United States, I believe you should engage with the United States. I don't take an extreme view against the United States. I meet them, I engage with them. But also I know about the hypocrisy of some of their policies in Malaysia. You can cheat in the elections here and they are muted. Okay? And this need to be, I mean, you must have a coherent, consistent foreign policy for people to trust you.
Do they usually send monitors for elections, international monitors, to Malaysia?
They don't.
To monitor the elections?
They don't, because the Malaysian government will not also accept. They have not accepted.
Yes. It won't make a difference because they already sent President Carter, former US President Carter, to the Hamas elections, and Hamas won, to the elections, excuse me, in Gaza, and Hamas won, but they didn't recognize the Hamas authority. Anyway, sir, but do you think now that the Obama administration, or Obama in particular, can make a difference in the Middle Eastern politics? Because, you know, the US image is already totally distorted to the people, I mean.
Yeah, but the United States remain to be an important international player. It has its ideals, which many of us share, on democracy, on freedom, on justice. And if you have the leadership that comes to accept this and have a policy that is consistent, coherent, Muslims are not blinkered in their views. They would accept. I always cite this example in Aceh after the tsunami. The sentiment against America was very strong, pervasive. But when the Americans came in with a genuine assistance to help, then you can see a matter of weeks, people turning, you know. So people don't hate America because they are whites or Americans. They hate because of the policy,
practices,
their contradiction, and the injustice. How do you expect any man or woman who believe in the element of human rights and justice to accept the crimes committed by the Israelis in Gaza?
Right, Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, we're going to stop now for a short break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk a bit about the Palestinian issue. A short break, and we'll be back. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Inside with Malaysian opposition leader Mr. Anwar Ibrahim. Welcome back, sir. Now, you have stirred a big controversy when you had certain stances regarding Israel, and you talked about Israel and the defense of Israel. And lots of people attacked you that you are pro-Israel and pro-the US. How can you explain this?
What
was the actual stance?
Yeah, there was no controversy. I met Khalid Mash'al after
Hamas leader.
the Hamas leader in Doha. In the residence of Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, whom I respect and I know very well, and he didn't even bother to, you know, ask me or require an explanation, because he read the article. It was an article in the Wall Street Journal that said, I have no problem with Israel, contingent, conditional upon Israel withdrawing their troops from the occupied territories, recognizing Masjid al-Aqsa and Al-Quds, and stop the killings, the plunder, the victimization of the Palestinians. So what the Malaysian media did was to cancel all that and said, I have no problem with the security of Israel.
It's as if saying La ilaha.
Yes.
You know, it's the same thing. You know,
That's
they just
true, yeah.
try to cut and edit this. Now, given the current situation in Gaza and the Israeli attack and onslaught against the civilian Gazans, so to say, do you think that it is in direct challenge to the Egyptian now current authority, that of the Muslim Brotherhood, so to say, after the fall of Mubarak? Do you agree with this?
Well, it is, well, firstly, historically, the injustice perpetrated against the Palestinians have been going on for 5 decades. So it is not exactly correct to say it is only ascribed to the new democratic forces after Al-Rabi' al-Arabi, although I prefer to use the term popularized by Sheikh Ardawi, Thawra, Sha'ab, people's uprising.
Revolution, uprising.
Which is more apt to describe. But of course it's the test of will of leaders of the new democracies, Tunisia, Egypt, including Turkey, of course, because Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan is taking a very tough, correct stance, which we support. But I think the Israelis, of course, misreading the situation purely and plainly because their complete arrogance of power. But in my criticism of the Malaysian government's attitude is that nothing has been done except for resolutions, number one. Number two, the resolution seems to ignore the role played by the United States. So we must also check on the Security Council and the United States, because without United States assistance or tacit approval, the Israelis will not move in that manner.
What would they do against the Israelis? Would they be able to stop them? I mean, with an Israeli administration headed by Netanyahu.
Of course they can. I mean, they can do it in Afghanistan, they can do it in Iraq, they can do it, I'm not suggesting they go and conquer Iraq, which I oppose the war in Iraq. But of course they can, it's a major, will a lot of influence. I mean, Israel is the largest recipient of aid from the United States.
Right.
Huge. I mean, the second, very, very, very low is Egypt. So how can you say there's absolutely no influence? We're not even influencing in terms of what is, improper. Just stop the killing. Why is it so difficult for a country that cherishes itself as the bastion of freedom and democracy cannot say, whatever excuse, stop killing women, children, and civilians?
Do you think Israel is still an asset to the U.S.?
Well, I follow, of course, U.S. Foreign policy. I follow the debates. Everybody seems to be competing to win over the Israeli support, which is unfortunate.
Especially the AIPAC, the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, because it's the lobbying group. For
the lobbying group. I have no, again I say, I have no qualms. You can be friendly to the Israelis and the Jews. It's not my problem. I don't take an extreme stance. But I would only say that you can't do that and at the same time condone the excesses and the killings on the pretext, well, to protect your security. Fair to protect security, but not by killing people.
Maybe the Americans, they support the Israelis in their attack against Gaza in a sense that, well, the Israelis, they have to clean their back in the south, finish the job, and then perhaps they could start something against Iran, against Lebanon, and change all the situation in the Middle East.
Well, I wouldn't, of course, say that far, but looking at and understanding history, development, and foreign policy stance of the United States, the position vis-a-vis Israel can be considered to be to the extreme, in the sense that all excesses, all transgression of international laws, all plunders, and including occupation of territories, seems to be condoned and accepted, and that is the main contentious issue with not only the Muslim world, but the world that believes in freedom and justice. And that seems absolutely so difficult. Many of my friends in the administration and past administration in the United States seem to tell me, Anwar, you can debate with them, you can argue with them, you can disagree with them on every subject except the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And I said, this is difficult for us to accept or swallow.
Yes. What prospects do you see to the Palestinian issue, sir?
I'm an optimist because the geopolitical setup in the development in the Middle East has changed. The countries are now led by legitimate leaders. In the past, the issue of legitimacy was a major problem. Who elect the leaders? Now you are dealing with countries that represent the aspirations and the conscience of the majority of their people. And they want justice. And I think they will have to perform. You see this initiative by President Dr. Morsi, and of course the clear foreign policy stance of Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan, representing this new sentiment in the Middle East.
But now we can see that those same countries, though there was a change, for example, to say in Egypt, in Libya, in Yemen to a certain extent, but there was a change in the people, but yet the practices on the ground and this autocracy still exist in those countries. Even in Turkey, for example, we have lots of incidents that are taking place.
Yes, I'm aware of that, but I'm talking about the shift, a clear shift in the policy, the independent stance that Turkey has taken. They are, of course, having this problem of reform and need to ensure that institutions are really mature and tough. So is in Egypt. You can expect Morsi to transform Egypt after decades of dictatorship, or probably a century, to transform itself in such a swift manner. But what I'm suggesting is, of course, it is a promising sign. Who would resent the fact that it is moving towards democracy and peaceful transition in that regard?
Now, yes, go ahead, sir. Now, there has been lots of rhetoric from various sides that things need to go in a different direction when it comes to the Palestinians. I mean, particularly now with this stance of the Gaza war, that they should support the Palestinians in a different sense. It's not only like you go out and you condemn, like for example the Malaysian government, they condemned the Israeli attacks against Gaza and they promised aid. But is this enough?
No, because the issue is not. That's why in my intervention I said, look, the issue of Palestine is the issue of a politics of dispossession. That's basic problem. The people's land have been grabbed and plundered. That has got to be resolved. Then if you talk about the security of Palestine and the protection, security and peace in Israel, that's where, I was being attacked, because the term is contentious there. But now you only talk in terms of protecting Israel and ignoring the plight of these masses of millions of people who are not having the opportunity to have a decent living, health and education. So we need therefore to bring back the entire issue on the table, not just this siege of Gaza, which is one issue which is imminent and pressing. And secondly, of course, the international community, and particularly the Muslim world, also the OIC, the Arab League, must do much more to alleviate the position of the Palestinians, their education, their health. Must they go all around the world to collect some donations to repair their mosques, to be destroyed the following year? Can't we, with all the wealth, the billions, the trillions at stake, take a firm commitment and finish that program? Must we just repeat the plight like in Darfur, Rohingyas, which require a few $1 million? But these are issues that Muslim leaders must address, particularly the rich countries.
Who can take the lead in such an action?
From experience, naturally, the people now will have to take the lead. If Thawra Sha'b, then expecting
and
some
this has
leaders.
proven true in the Middle East.
Yes.
To a certain extent.
Which is spectacular, which is phenomenal.
Do you think such kind of... You talked about the issue that the Arab Spring is a phenomenon which is not only bound to the Middle East, but it could also be a worldwide phenomenon. Can we say that this phenomenon, the awakening, could sweep into Malaysia? And if so, in which direction? And for what?
Although the media here, as you know, has no place for dissent and opposition. For example, I'm talking to you, Zainab, and but in Malaysian media, I don't have 1 minute of airtime, all right? But
it's totally biased.
It's totally, not only biased, totally blackout. Total blackout. But you cannot underestimate the wisdom of the people.
Sure.
Okay? Otherwise, how do you expect them to topple dictators and dictator regime with the entire set of intelligence and mukhabarat under their wings? So people have them. So we have to work hard to engage. And the development in the Arab world, the Thawra Shah, has immense influence. You know, students, not only in the Azhar in terms of Islamic education, but also medicals and social sciences and communications. There are hundreds and thousands throughout the region, and they, of course, they follow the development in the Middle East and in particular in Egypt, and to understand why is it that the people suddenly rise to reject corruption, abuse of power, and unfreedom in that sense. That's why I'm very, very optimistic. And they start talking, even now, in the issue. Why do you then support Palestinians? Because you want justice. But is there justice at home? This is the next question. Why do you feel revolting when you read about Abu Ghraib and the injustices perpetrated by the American forces in the prison in the Arab world, and particularly
Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad, yes.
Then the next question is, are we all well treated in our prisons in our Muslim world? So it has to be a consistent policy, and this is public awareness campaign that I am very optimistic that people will then support.
Mr. Ibrahim, will your administration, hopefully when you get to power, will it bring about such kind of change?
Then inshallah, I mean, we have gone through these trials for a reason. I don't have...
I mean, everyone is fighting you.
Yes. Not everyone, the crooks, the corrupt.
But the people, perhaps, you shouldn't underestimate, as you said, their wisdom to judge.
True, yes. Because finally we ask, why are we independent and we don't have freedom? Why are we independent but we only hear one side? Why are we so rich? One of the richest developing countries, and you enrich the few families of the prime minister and ministers as billionaires, and you just have a proper living. Look at just outside Kuala Lumpur, behind the big towers, and you see how the living conditions of our poor people, and many of them are also Muslims. The pockets of poverty among the ethnic Chinese and Indians. The vast majority are still the indigenous people, or vast majority are Muslims.
Can the Arab Spring turn into an Islamic Spring? And if so, in what sense? I mean, you have a special definition of this thing, this movement that took place, that swept into the whole Middle East. That could it be a spring, a revolution, an awakening? What is it?
Well, clearly this spirit of awakening, and you put it correctly, I mean, and awareness is something that is required. I mean, for Muslims and for non-Muslims. Do we cherish freedom? Yes. Do we condone corruption and excesses? No. Do you want judiciary that's independent? Yes. You can't blame the British anymore. They left this country more than 50 years ago. The first 10 years, yes. Like in Egypt, the first few years you can start blaming Mubarak. Now after some years, you have to stop and you have to start then undertaking this reform. So I think some of them, my friends, my teachers tell me, Anwar, you went through, well, hell, but for a reason. Do you understand what's poverty or injustice or cruelty? You do. So if you are given a chance, make sure this is stopped at all cost.
But do you consider it to become, as some people argue, that it's not an Arab awakening, it's an Islamic awakening? And some people even went further to say that it's a more of an awakening of the a Muslim Brotherhood or a Salafist project.
Well, there's an attempt to portray it that manner. I hope the leaders would be mindful of the fact that this is actually a popular uprising. You must represent the masses. I mean, you have to preserve your Muslim identity. I'm a Muslim. I'm proud to say that I'm a practicing Muslim. Alhamdulillah, I'm trying to be always a better Muslim. But you must also understand that in Malaysia we have 40% who are non-Muslims, and this country is also theirs. So we must make sure that once you preserve, you reaffirm your faith and your identity, you must make sure that this country is inclusive. It is not sectarian.
Of course.
But of course, this is also our concern. I mean, it's also my concern.
Right.
I mean,
we will talk about your concerns,
yes.
your coalition concerns, but we have to stop now for another break. A short break, and we'll be back with Malaysian opposition leader Mr. Anwar Ibrahim on this special interview from the inside. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Inside with Malaysian opposition leader Mr. Anwar Ibrahim. Mr. Ibrahim, let's come now to talk a bit about local, internal Malaysian politics. Now, they say that from an underdog position that your opposition might score a kind of upset win. And if this takes place, it's going to be a kind of first ever made regime change in Malaysia. Now, my question is, how far could you achieve this? And what is the percentage, so to say, of the stakes here? And if you achieve this, how are you going to be different vis-a-vis the current government of Mr. Najib Abdul Razak or the previous governments?
Is this a realistic expectation, for example? And I would say yes. In the 2008 elections, from Malaya, we won a simple majority, 51% of the votes. We lost in the Sabah and Sarawak, mainly among the indigenous tribes. In the last 4 years, we worked very hard, and we are able to penetrate into the rural heartland. So there is, of course, that possibility, and our commitment and our agenda, which is our Justice Adalah Party, the Islamic Party, and also the Chinese-based, mainly the Democratic Action Party, in this ruling coalition.
Diversified.
Diverse, very diverse. One claims to be Islamic, one claims to be secular, and we are somewhat trying to forge this understanding. But what is important, to the credit both, not only the Adalah, but also the Islamic Party and the Democratic Action Party, we came out with the clear policy guidelines. What we mean by freedom of expression, of the judiciary, of conscience. What we mean by economic policy that must promote growth, but must be strong in terms of justice, equity, equitable distribution, and affirmative action. What do you mean by religious tolerance? Islam is the religion of the Federation of Malaysia. But we must ensure complete independence and freedom for people to practice their own belief system.
Now, do you have any opinion polls that indicate perhaps where are you now as the elections are approaching?
There are a lot of constraints of opinion polls. In all authoritarian and dictatorial regimes, you can't conduct.
So Malaysia is a dictatorship?
Well, certainly it's authoritarian. It's authoritarian because the media is controlled by one party. Okay, and the entire instruments of government has been very much controlled. You can see the media, it is whether a country is democratic or not.
Now, your daughter, MP Nur Al-Azza, she's a prominent women figure in Malaysia. She was attacked recently, and there was lots of controversy, and she was attacked with apostasy, so to say. What was the real issue behind this? And what did she actually say that led to this kind of criticism, harsh criticism, actually?
We brought up my family, my children as practicing Muslims, and I'm proud of that fact. Whether she studied here or she studied in Washington, Johns Hopkins, she was always in the generally Muslim dress and take care of the code. But we also, promote this sort of understanding, this friends and engagement with the Christians, with the Jews and the Buddhists and the minorities here. And what she said was based on La ikraha fid din, qad tabayyana rushdu min al-ghayy. There's no compulsion religion because we know, can establish what is right, what is wrong, what is the truth and the falsehood. So that is not that is universally applicable, she said. And she said, therefore, but we also subjected to the constitutional framework here, which we have to accept the laws on apostasy. Just because she said that, they accuse her of supporting apostasy. So she released the entire tapes. Now, but does not stop the government media attacking her ferociously, hours a day, without 1 minute of an opportunity
to
for her
rebut.
to explain.
Yeah.
That explains.
What's your stance here when we're talking about the religious freedom of Muslims? What's your stance concerning this issue?
Well, faith is a decision that one has to take and to believe in, a man or woman, and understand the asbab nuzul, the reason for the ayat and the cases in point. Is meant message universal. You should not compel others to embrace Islam. But once you are in that faith, you have of course the guidelines. Like here, you are bound by certain rules and procedures. But as long as it does not transgress that laws and it doesn't create a major civil strife, commotion, there's very little that what I can do. I neither support nor encourage, but there is a limit with my powers or influence to stop anyone if they are subject to the laws in the country. And that's precisely the point, and I think there's a consensus in that.
Now, your coalition, sir, this front that you are presenting, includes various diversified ethnic groups. But do you think that this front, when you win the elections, are going to stay compact together, knowing the fact, and here I have to go to a certain survey done by pollsters, they say that the number of Malaysians who felt that ethnic relations in the country was good declined by 12% between the years 2006 and 2011. And the same survey also found that the number of Malaysians who believed that ethnic unity as sincere and friendly declined also by from 54% to 35% between 2006 again and 2011. In their view, they say the survey findings reflect a significant shift in Malaysian public thinking. The optimism of mid-2000s appears to have given way to increased insecurities and distrust, which is in part due to the current competitive political environment.
Well, that result of that survey helped to fortify our position that under this administration, this government, harping on racist views about Malay supremacy, Malay rights, and sometimes even demonizing others. For example, saying that beware, one state which is under us is now being Christianized. We ask where, what evidence? Nothing. Or yes, beware, the rights of the Malay indigenous people will be trampled with, So this sort of campaign, smear campaign by the ruling establishment helped to create this unease. But it helps strengthen our position. Look, if you want this country to remain safe, peaceful, then let us have a program that is clear, but that is just, that is not discriminatory, based on the principle of justice.
In this sense, how do you approach the issue of women, the women question in Malaysia? Knowing the fact that your wife is a prominent Malaysian woman in the country, and your daughter too.
Yeah. I'm blessed with 6 children and 5 daughters. So, I'm always outvoted by the women in the house. But I'm very proud of them because they are very tough in terms of defending their rights. They caution me and advise me continuously to be sensitive, to be gender sensitive in terms of justice. But we are also fortunate because in Malaysia, if you look at school-going children, universities, the number of women are quite pronounced. I mean, more than 50%, and generally they do quite well. And therefore, in our policy in the party, for example, is a very clear guideline that you must have minimum, for example, 30% of candidates, which is still not fair because they say at least 50%, but to move to 30% is radical in terms of the political
Where can you find the 50%?
Well, there are enough qualified women, but in terms of political career, particularly in the rural heartland.
Not in Malaysia, I mean, but is this applicable to have a 50% share of a quota for women in the parliament elsewhere?
Well, they have in Sweden, I think now.
Okay.
Yeah, and then a few European countries, they are embarking on that sort of a line. But certainly, we must have a conscious policy, issue of discrimination of women, even in terms of marriage, laws of marriage, in the Sharia courts, where the position of women, the way they've been treated, the divorce, the issue of alimony, all these things must be considered. Because otherwise, on the surface, you think things are changing, they're getting modern. But when you go through the nitty-gritty, then you find, the prejudice, the discrimination, there is no gender equality in the sense that we are talking about.
In talking about the Sharia law and the practice of the Sharia law, now the radical Islamic movement is part of the Malaysian opposition, and there is a wide sense about or a wide fear of Islamic extremism. Now, don't you think that when you come to power, the people here, they have concerns that if those people come to power, hudud law is going to be imposed, and this is going to be, a total change, but the change that we not aspire to in Malaysia?
Well, as Muslims, of course, we accept the Sharia, we accept the Quran, but we also know that da'wah and message needs to be presented and in a manner that people do understand. But what is more pertinent in this country, we have 40% more non-Muslims. And I've worked with the Islamic Party. I mean, it's not fair to suggest that they are radical because they have agreed with this common policy platform on gender issues, on even religious freedom.
Maybe they agreed, but just to get into power.
Well, that is the old, argument by the, in French, this éradicateur, to wipe out this opposition like they experienced in FIS. But here, the position of the Islamic Party, I mean, they are not even 40% of seats they are contesting, or probably less, or 35% is shared by the three. So you must build in a consensus. I take a view that you should not deny people from talking about Islam or Islamic State or hudud. I mean, neither should you stop people from talking about secularism or secular laws. But let us then engage, because this country must allow for people to engage, remain Muslim, but also to be creative in their views and their thinking. But thus far, our consensus is, number one, we are tied to the Constitution. Number two, we must build a consensus before we embark on any new plans or programs. So I'm not too worried about the outcome, frankly.
Right. Now, the democratic experiment of Malaysia, do you think it could be applied in other Arab and Islamic countries? They could benefit from this experience?
Well, we used to do better, but I think you look at Tunisia, Egypt, Turkey, with all the problems they're facing, I'm not discounting that, they are far ahead than us. They have a free media, they have free fair elections, and they're trying to get the judiciary independent, and they're making various steps in amending the laws, like in Indonesia, you know. Although it is a process, the Islah or reform is a process, and it is right that people are quite critical, but sometimes in the process you're a bit slow, you make mistakes. But certainly it is far more advanced and progressive than what we see here. Economically, I grant, we have a better threshold. We started much earlier in terms of industrialization, in terms of getting the infrastructure ready. I mean, so I think we need to then move on to the issues of freedom and cultural enlightenment.
I can understand that because, you know, Lebanon, for example, is also a multicultural society, and you have different sects inside this very small country.
Oh, yes, yes.
And you know now lots of events are taking place, perhaps that might lead the country and make it fall more into a sectarian strife. And also such kind of events are taking place in Syria, in Turkey, in Iraq, in Jordan perhaps. Do you think that the country or this side of the world is going to fall into a big war that is going to affect to a certain extent the economy perhaps?
There's always the worry and the fear of balkanization of countries being, you know, cut. It has happened before, not necessarily over religion, but over cultures, race.
Partitioning the countries.
Partition, you know, India, Pakistan, then Pakistan, Bangladesh. When they declared East Timor to be independent, then there were fears that there will be balkanization in Indonesia. It did not happen. I am generally in these things more optimistic. I mean, Czechoslovakia is the other example. But I'm more optimistic because these countries. But finally, if people decide, what do? You kill them, or you have to accept. And this is, if you are a true democrat, you have to accept that sometimes the aspirations of the people cannot be ignored. But I think Lebanon has gone through, you know, Muslims, Christians, Druze, Maronites,
yes.
And they've been, I mean, and they're doing remarkably well, given the history in the recent past. And I think hopefully with this new democracy, new media, sanity would prevail.
But regarding the current status quo, what do you think is going to take place? Is the Middle East going to, because lots of analysts and strategic analysts, they talk about a new world order. So is the Middle East going to be the key for this new world order they are talking about and trying to promote?
Well, new world order is of course quite relative. It depends on where you see it from, Washington, London or Paris. But if you look purely in terms of the change, which is welcome, which is phenomenal, the transformation, no one in the right mind would say that is not something that we welcome. It is painful, the process is painful and brutal, like you are seeing in Syria right now. But is the process towards reform, democracy and freedom something positive? I believe so, and it is irreversible. Dictators and authoritarian leaders have to go. There's no question. You must be, you must have legitimacy to be able to articulate policies and lead your societies.
Right, right. Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, head of the PKR party and leader of the Malaysian opposition, it was a great privilege and a great opportunity to host you on Mayadeen and on this special From the Inside. Thanks a million for this interview.
Thank you, Zana. It's my pleasure.
إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل، وشكر جزيل لكل من ساهم في إنجاح هذه المقابلة. شكر لحسين نصار الذي رافقني هنا في هذه الرحلة المميزة إلى كوالالمبور العاصمة الماليزية، وإلى هذا اللقاء الخاص من الميادين ومن الداخل. إلى اللقاء.